Greetings, ghouls and gals. My name is Mike, and this is the Bored Cyborg that eats flesh. Today I'm reviewing an absolute classic, George Romero's independent and most influential film, Night of the Living Dead. My least favorite film in Romero's original Dead trilogy. Spoilers, I still love it, but it isn't perfect. Night of the Living Dead is quite possibly the most influential horror film ever made. It sits shoulder to shoulder with films like Jaws, The Exorcist, and Halloween. The rules and atmosphere that Romero conjured up and laid down half a century ago still have bearing on today's horror filmmaking, especially in the zombie genre. Ironically enough, the word zombie is never uttered in the film. This wasn't the first zombie film, but it was the first of its kind. Prior to this, the only zombies in cinema were of the voodoo or Haitian type. Films like White Zombie and King of the Zombies featured undead beings in a slave-like trance. They lumbered about, serving their master like empty vessels of skin and bones, but they did not consume flesh. Romero's zombies did. I grew up watching this on VHS, and it was one that my mother loved and shared with me. The VHS box art, cheesy as it may look now with its awfully colorized cover, scared the shit out of me as a kid. The image on the front of a ginger Bill Hinsman, who's gotten the upper hand on poor Johnny, mixed with the font of the title and the brief description of what's in store, chilled me to the bone, but it also intrigued me. It's hard to imagine learning of zombies for the first time as we sit here in 2018, imbued by the glut of zombie media. Believe it or not, zombies were not popular in the 90s, and this VHS tape was my first encounter with them. I couldn't quite wrap my head around why a human would eat the flesh of another human, but I wanted to find out, and I did over and over and over again. I've seen it a few times as an adult, but I tend to lean towards its superior sequel, Dawn of the Dead, which I hadn't seen until my early teens. So to kick off October the right way, I popped in my recently acquired Night of the Living Dead Criterion Collection Blu-ray, which was quite the upgrade from my shoddy VHS copy that I had growing up. The film looks beautiful. Easily better than it's ever looked. The picture and the sound and the music were enough to give me goosebumps during the opening sequence. So why is this my least favorite in the original trilogy? I'm not telling. Everyone knows the story, so I won't bore you by retreading it painstakingly like a particular character does in the film. But first I want to talk about what I love about Night of the Living Dead. Of course there's the heavy nostalgia of this being one of the first horror films I remember watching as a kid and being completely entranced. The setup is very simple and follows a group of survivors who hole up in a house in the country in order to survive and fight off the invading undead. Barbara and Johnny are visiting their father's grave when a bumbling zombie decides to f their day up.
There comes one of them now.
I'm so glad that this film was shot in black and white, as I really do feel like it marks the end of an era. And its look only helps to accentuate the dread of the unknown. Of course, color was being used almost exclusively at this point in cinema, but back in 1968, Romero didn't have the money for all that fancy schmancy color shit. Colorized versions do exist, but please avoid them like your life depends on it. No! The pacing is fantastic and analogous to a snowball rolling downhill. The threat increasingly becomes bigger and more dangerous as our diverse group of characters struggle to make it through the dreaded night. Romero's cinematography is beautifully haunting, and some of the shots of the encroaching zombies are some of my favorite in all of horror cinema. They are perfectly framed and lit, and infinitely creepy. The zombie sequences are still scary to this day, and their effectiveness is amplified by a nightmarishly disorienting minimalistic score. The wobbly early synth really gets under your skin and makes the lingering scenes of the zombies consuming hunks of flesh and internal organs that much more uncomfortable. These are the scenes that really disturbed me as a kid. And to be honest, they still disturb me as an adult. Having minimal or no music while the editor refuses to cut away from the feasting zombies always gets me. The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue drew a ton of inspiration from Night of the Living Dead and uses similar techniques to maximize discomfort. And it fucking works damn well in both films. It proves that Romero and his crew were way ahead of the game. This film broke ground in the violence and gore departments in terms of realistic violence and graphic scenes of the zombies feasting. A decade earlier, Hammer Studios were really the progenitors of blood and color films, but it was minimal and super Technicolor bright red and just not very realistic or convincing. Then came Herschel Gordon Lewis, who was certainly inspired by Hammer to make even more graphic and controversial, over-the-top blood and gore sequences with his film Blood Feast. His films definitely pushed the boundaries by cranking up the shock and gore dial for the time, but unfortunately, as much of a visionary as HGL was, he just wasn't a very competent filmmaker at all. Just watch any of his films. Then Night of the Living Dead comes along, in black and white, and ends up causing more controversy and shocking audiences even more due to Romero's grisly and realistic approach to violence. This film pissed off a lot of uptight prickwads and totally shook up the movie industry. Sadly, George Romero failed to reap the benefits of the popularity of his film due to the original theatrical distributors, the Walter Reed organization in Pittsburgh, neglecting to put any copyright indication on the prints. Fucking ass fishies. And although the legend failed to benefit from his most popular and influential work, he spent the rest of his career wrestling with movie studios and making his films the way he wanted to make them. He's a champion of what makes filmmaking so important and an inspiration to anyone who wants to make a movie, including this guy. Night of the Living Dead is also a film that has something to say, like most great films do. It comments on the politics of the time, American culture in general, as well as the racial tension during the 60s. And that leads me to the characters. Herein lies one of my biggest issues with the film, so I'll just get it out of the way now. Judith O'Dea's character, Barbara, is awful. I feel as if she's easily the weakest link in the chain. In fact, she doesn't even represent a link in the chain in my opinion. Barbara is completely in shock and totally helpless throughout the entirety of the film. One scene I can't stand is when Ben asks what happened to her and her brother. Like me, he ends up wishing that he never asked the question.
And he grabbed me! He grabbed me! And he ripped at me!
For the following 2 to 3 minutes, she painstakingly recalls what happened at a grueling pace. She did what she was directed to do, but I'm not exactly sure what Romero was going for. Maybe he was trying to illustrate that some people simply can't deal with the trauma of an event like this, and so she refuses to accept what's happening. Some people curl up into a fetal position and become a shell of their former selves. Sort of like zombies. If that's what Romero was shooting for, I strongly feel as if he went about it the wrong way. I feel like her character is wasted potential. However, the rest of the cast is damn near perfect.
We've got to get down into the cellar. Go down in your damn cellar. Get out of here!
Speaking of breaking ground, Romero approached filmmaking with a giant-ass sledgehammer and cast Dwayne Jones as Ben, a black man as the lead character. In the 60s, this was unheard of, unless your name was Sidney Poitier. Romero claims he did this because Dwayne Jones was the best actor, which is admirable and very well may be. But intentional or not, this was a huge deal, especially for a horror film. Dwayne Jones is fantastic as our stoic, strong, and quick-thinking hero. He takes zero shit from anyone, but it's clear that he has a good heart and is genuinely a good man. He fucks many a zombie up all throughout the film with anything that he could find to bludgeon or blow them away. He clashes with Harry Cooper, who is played by Carl Hardman. Hardman, who has secretly taken up shelter in the basement of the house with his wife, his sick child, and 2 other strangers. We meet them all at once, and each of them brings something to the table. His wife, Helen, is the motherly one, who is blinded by the love she has for her sick child, which ultimately leads to her demise.
Oh, baby.
There's the headstrong, jock-type Tom, played by Keith Wayne, who assists Ben in coming up with a plan that they could put into motion before it's too late. His girlfriend Judy, played by Judith Riley, stands as the strongest female in the film, albeit a bit aloof and innocent.
You always have a smile for me. How can you smile like that all the time?
Then there's Harry and Helen's zombie kid, who brutally murders her mother's neck with a garden spade. The group's chemistry is palpable. For the most part, their actions feel justified and natural, and the dialogue between them is snappy, clever, and builds their respective characters perfectly.
We've got to have food down there. We've got a right.
This is your house.
We've got a right.
You going down there with him?
Well,
Yes or no? This is your last chance. No beating around the bush.
This film is really a character study disguised as a horror film. The anger and emotion that the outbreak causes increasingly makes it harder for them to work as a team, and they eventually turn on each other. This is a theme that Romero explored throughout his entire career. Romero really understood people better than most directors and writers, and watching his films makes that clear. The only other thing that I think the film could have done without is the heavy exposition that we're bombarded with constantly via the TV and the radio.
The plan is, kill the brain, and you kill the ghoul.
I suppose Romero thought that the audience needed all this explaining, not unlike the end of Psycho, where a doctor exposits to the audience what exactly they just witnessed. It may have been essential then, but it isn't now, and I think the film would be better without the majority of it. There's just way too much.
a radio.
County, Pennsylvania, the Butler County Sheriff has verified...
However, it could be viewed as economical world building, as it certainly helps to flesh out the outside world, and it gives the film scope. I'm just arguing that we didn't need all of the information that the TV and radio spews at us.
You feel there is a connection between this and the phenomenon?
There's a definite connection.
I think the film would have been more enigmatic and scarier without it. I do really like the sheriff's dialogue, however, and his delivery is very matter-of-factual, and it makes me smile.
Are they slow moving, Chief?
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
With all that said, Night of the Living Dead is a classic. No doubt about it, but I just think it's a flawed classic. It's still one of the finest independent films ever made, and it's also still one of the best zombie movies of all time. Unfortunately, the two aspects that really frustrate me are large parts of the film, especially the TV radio exposition fest. Obviously, all the great things the film does completely outweigh its flaws, so much so that I think people are afraid to discuss those flaws. Or maybe I'm just an idiot. Either way, the film holds a special place in my heart from all the memories I have of watching it as a kid with my mom and marveling at the violence and eeriness of it all, as well as a perfect ending that both shocked and scarred me as a child.
Good shot. Okay, he's dead. Let's go get him. That's another one for the fire.
How could they do that, Mommy? The movie is still inspiring filmmakers, as well as being shamelessly ripped off to this day. The rules it establishes, like shooting them in the head and the infection spreading through being bitten, are still used in modern zombie films.
If you had a gun, shoot him in the head. That's a sure way to kill him. If you don't, get yourself a club or a torch. Beat him or burn him. They go up pretty easy.
They are pretty much ingrained in zombie culture. And that's the thing. George Romero started a fucking culture. How many filmmakers could claim that? The man is a legend, and he is sorely missed. He was a director that gave many studios the middle finger in the name of art, creativity, and filmmaking. Creativity will prevail. Unless flesh-eating dead people really do rise from your grave and consume us all. Then we'd be I just want to thank you guys for checking out my Night of the Living Dead review. I'm curious to know what your favorite Romero Dead film is. It'd be cool to see some people that really love Diary of the Dead or Survival. Also, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up, as well as hitting that subscribe button if you want to see more videos like it. You could also hit that little notification bell. I release at least 2 videos like this a month, and I try to sneak in a third, maybe even a 4th video here and there if time permits it. Lastly, if you know somebody that enjoys Night of the Living Dead and you think they'd enjoy this review, go ahead and share it with them on Facebook or Twitter or any other social media sites that you use. Finally, I just want to say happy October to you all. Happy Halloween. I hope you guys had a good one and watched many a horror film, and I'll see you next time. Bored Cyborg, out.